Hello my loves and welcome back to this little bookish corner of the internet. I did it wrong. This here little bookish corner of the internet. If you watched my previous video, which was a reaction of sorts to the shortlist of the Women's Prize 2018, you will know that this video is shot right after the last video, and I'm going to talk to you about the books that were on the long list that I have read and whether or not I think they got snubbed. I gave one-word reviews at the end of the last video, so if you want to go back and see those, you should do so now. I will be waiting. And if not, because really who has the time to pause one video and go back to an old one? Me, because I watch too much YouTube. We are going to talk about those books that did not make the shortlist and what I thought of them. So the first one I want to talk to you about is Elmet by Fiona Mozley. Fiona Mozley is a 29-year-old PhD student, I believe, and this is her debut novel. And let me tell you, the one-word review that I gave was very true. I think this is one of the most accomplished debut novels I have ever read. That's not to say it was perfect. We follow a family comprised of Daddy, as he's known in the book, who's the father of the family, quite evidently, and Daniel and Kathy, who are his children. And Daddy has taken Daniel and Kathy to live off-grid in the middle of a copse in the forest in a house that they built themselves on some land that they are renting. And Daddy fights for a living in a sort of very old-timey way. He gets money for fighting certain people. People like to watch him fight, and he's kind of this huge character in more ways than one. And the book is narrated by his son Daniel, and I would say the first half of the book is kind of setting up their lives and what it is to live off the grid and, you know, not go to school and not have a traditional education. Kind of live in this environment where you have to teach yourself most of what you learn, and it's an eye for an eye, and in a lot of ways they're sort of living in a medieval time by their own choice. And then the second half of the book becomes more plot driven, I would say, in that it entails an argument over rent and land and who owns land and who has the right to land on which property is built and property rights, which all sounds very dry when I say it like this, but I promise you that when you read about it, it is not dry. And not only is it not dry, but it is also hugely relevant to the time that we're living in, especially in the UK. Debates around land ownership are a very hot topic, and I think Fiona Mozley has done well to kind of build a story around that and make it an even bigger conversation around morals and what is the right thing to do and the wrong thing to do, and also how human of a property land can take on when the land that you live on and the environment that you have built around yourself has such a huge impact on who you are as a person and who your family is. That kind of idea of land as a character and land as a living thing is very much explored in this novel. And I think its greatest strength was its subtlety. I was truly amazed at the amount of concepts that Fiona Mozley manages to explore without even making it obvious that she's exploring them. So we have questions around gender and what happens when you haven't had the opportunity to kind of be forced into specific gender roles by society. When you're living off the grid, are you forced to fit into those gender roles, or does it not happen? The exploration of that is almost silent and so unbelievably subtle that I loved it. The descriptions of the English countryside in this novel are just truly breathtaking. The language sings, the rhythm. She's got the English language by the horns, you guys, and I kept reminding myself that this author is 29 years old and it is her debut novel, and I find it amazing. If I ever can write like her, I would be happy. It is not perfect. I have issues with how the main character writes. It would have done better to be in the third person, I would say, because the language is so beautiful and because the author has such a confident grasp on language and such a confident grasp of all these concepts. Sometimes you forget that it's supposed to be from Daniel's perspective, and Daniel isn't particularly worldly and isn't particularly literate, even though he can read. And I'm not sure that he would be saying half the things he says in the novel, especially if the dialogue is anything to go by. So that's slightly problematic. I have a bit of an issue with pacing because the novel is very slow and very quiet until like the last, I don't know, not even third, like a smaller portion of that, where everything gets a bit ridiculous and dramatic and crazy, and I was taken in by that time by the novel, so it didn't put me off. I perhaps would have played around with the pacing a little bit, but frankly so worth reading, especially if you have any kind of affinity with the English countryside and any kind of interest in those big moral questions of like who owns your world and your land in the most widest of senses. I thought it was fantastic, and I kind of wish it had made the shortlist. Number 2 is, I'm worried about talking about this one because it's Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine by Gail Honeyman. I feel like every year there is a darling of novels. Like, people love it. It takes the world by storm. And I'm not about to give a bad review. I'm reassuring you, I thought it was great. I listened to it on audio. It was one of the best read audiobooks I've ever read. Like, honestly, it was super fantastic. And I had heard so much good about it from BookTube, from my mom, from loads of people around me. And the story of the way that this novel came into being is romantic in itself. Gail Honeyman won a creative writing competition. She's in her 40s. This is her first novel. The world is amazed by it. I love all of that stuff. I really, really liked it. I'll tell you what it's about. Let's backtrack. So we follow Eleanor, who is the loneliest character in the history of existence. As you'll have heard from 1,000,001 reviews, the thing is that on a Friday night, she speaks to the bus driver, and then she literally does not speak to another human soul between Friday night conversation with the bus driver and coming back in to the office on Monday. Now, that might not sound like a big deal, but think about the last time that you did not speak to another human for 2 days. Anyone. Not your parents, not your significant other, not someone on the phone, not a cold caller, nothing. You cannot remember, I'm sure of it, the last time that you literally did not use your vocal cords for 2 days. That is profound. Really a profound thing, and considering loneliness on that level is hugely important, because the fact is that people do live like this. There are people in all of the cities in Los Angeles, London, New York, who literally do not have anyone. And I think we all take for granted the idea of having at least one person that we can always phone and talk to and dust off the old vocal cords with, but that is not a reality for everyone. And so that central theme and that central idea, and kind of taking that and staring it in the face through the character of Eleanor, I think is hugely important. As a result of this isolation, Eleanor is incredibly socially inept. She hasn't learned the social conventions. She doesn't have a social life, so she doesn't know how to interact with other people. And in that sense, she kind of stands for the alien that comes to Earth, and we have to teach her all the weird stuff that we do here on Earth. And the story follows her as she kind of comes out of her shell. Something happens, I don't really want to spoil it, but basically something happens. She is witness to something with one of her colleagues, which brings them closer together, and through becoming closer, she starts doing more with her life and starts having a social life and going out and creating a friendship with this man, her colleague. And it becomes clear throughout the book that whilst you might have thought at first that Eleanor is autistic, and I really think that at the beginning of the book you are led to believe that is the reason why she doesn't understand social convention, it becomes clear that her isolation and her lack of understanding of social mores comes from trauma, and a trauma that she experienced as a child and that she is unearthing and coming to terms with. Now, this is where problem one lies for me. I felt that Gail Honeyman knew that at the start of the novel you were thinking, okay, this person's autistic, because autism has become a thing that is quite widely explored in the media. We have a lot of media that has autistic main characters or side characters. We know what to look out for, so to speak. The truth of that media is questionable sometimes, looking at you, the good doctor. But I don't think Eleanor is autistic. I think you then turn that on its head later and realise that the reason she is the way she is because of what she's been through. I feel manipulated by that choice to make me think, is she autistic, is she not? And then have the trauma come in. I feel slightly manipulated by that. Then there's also another plot detail, which I am not at liberty to divulge because I know that there are people who've probably not read the book, towards the end of the book, which A, I predicted, B, is hugely manipulative. Speaking of, I don't understand this trend of always needing a twist at the end of books. I think that Eleanor Oliphant stood strongly and confidently and well as a character study and as a kind of exploration of friendship and loneliness and love and the importance of human connection. I think it was great, and it just had to have this twist that went and ruined everything at the end. And I guess that twist was indicative of my major problem with it, which is that I kept feeling the author within this character study, within this fully formed, very lovable character of Eleanor Oliphant. I kept feeling this author signposting me. This is what you're meant to feel now. This is what I want you to think. This is where we're at now. And I don't need that. I don't need an author inserting herself into her books. I just don't need it. Eleanor stands well for herself, and I wish she had been allowed to do that. And something about the twist made me feel kind of dirty at the end of it, and that sucked because I had really enjoyed my reading experience of it. I think that was unnecessary, and it was one of those things that, yeah, sullied my experience of the whole thing. So there you go. I feel like that came across way more negative than I wanted it to. Like, I did actually really enjoy the book, and I still think of Eleanor as a character, and like compared to The Idiot and whatever, like it was not at all a bad book. And I think as a debut, like it's strong. But anyway, so gotta be, you know, I don't know how I was going to finish that sentence. I'm just going to carry on. The last book that I have to talk to you in this two-part video is Kit de Waal's second novel, The Trick to Time. I will link down below my review of My Name is Leon, which was her debut novel, which I reviewed Christmas 2016, I want to say, which I loved. You can go back and hear me wax lyrical about how much I adored that book. And I hated the fact that as soon as I found out that she had a second novel coming out, as happy as I was for her, I was really worried that every single review was going to compare it to Leon, because I guess that's the curse of the successful debut, is that it's hard to match. So whilst I was reading it, I was super aware of trying not to compare the two, and I think generally I did quite a good job. We follow a young Irish girl called Mona who falls in love and marries an Irish man called William, and they live in Birmingham together after their marriage, and we follow them through that. It's actually a retrospective book though, because it opens with Mona on her 60th birthday, kind of looking back at her past with William and also exploring where she's at now. She's living in an English seaside town and William is not in the picture anymore, and she has a shop that makes wooden dolls. This book is super hard to talk about without spoiling. I don't even want to tell you for what purpose she makes the dolls, but it's in order to help a very specific type of grief. And the book is kind of a seamless traveling in time between these flashbacks to where we get to slowly build up puzzle piece by puzzle piece her relationship with William and who she was as a young woman and what brought her to where she is today and why she's making these dolls, and then also her as an old woman. So the book in itself is a trick to time in that very risky doing flashbacks. A lot of novels do it and it's more or less successful. In this case, I really think it was successful. And at the beginning of the book, her father tells her, there's a trick to time, Mona. You can make it contract or you can make it expand. And in a lot of ways, I think in the very structure of her novel, Kit de Waal plays with that idea. But in a lot of ways too, it is about time in all of its forms. The idea that you can live a lifetime in a moment, the idea that you never know how little time you have or how long a moment is going to feel. Things might happen to you that freeze time and that make it stop. Things you can't get over, things you grieve for. You can play with time, you can be a little bit funny with it by imagining things, by telling stories a different way than the way they actually happened. That's all playing with time and trying to exert some kind of control over it that you don't have. It's very clever in that sense because I think it plays with its own title in a whole bunch of very intriguing and very beautiful ways. The one thing that absolutely stood out to me about this book, in the same way that it did with Leon, is just how kind Kit de Waal is to her characters. And I feel like that sounds weird because maybe the characters don't stand independently from the author. But the stories that come out of her head and onto the page are just treated with such gentleness and such kindness and such three-dimensionality and such a complete lack of selfishness on her own part as an author. I think these characters really do live for her, and I think you can tell that. And it just ends up being such a warm reading experience. I remember feeling that about Leon as well, despite the fact that it was dealing with some sad topics. And this is the same. It's very sad, and in a way it deals with more loss and grief than it does happiness. But just the very kindness that you feel for Mona and the love that you feel for her, especially given that it's only 250 pages long, is just immense. And in a way, she's made her entire life out of being kind to other people and being the person that she needed when she was a young woman. I thought the speech was really realistic. I loved the depictions of the friendships between older women. I think you guys know that I love friendships between women in books, but friendship between like retired women in tiny towns has a particular kind of appeal to me. Yeah, I loved it. I thought it was really atmospheric, really sad, really clever, and just really damn nice. I hate that word, and I'm sure that all my old English professors would hate that, but yeah, it was, I think it's a testament to how well she can write. And just before I go, I love what she said about not getting shortlisted for the Women's Prize. She said not getting shortlisted for the Women's Prize is kind of like when George Clooney flirts with you. You know he's gone and fallen in love with someone else and maybe even married them, but damn it doesn't change the fact that he flirted with you, which I just think is so wonderful and is so indicative of what a self-effacing, kind person she must be. So yeah, definitely credit to Kit de Waal. And I think that's it. So only one real bummer on that one, and that was the idiot, which I talked about in my previous video. Again, I did really like Eleanor. I just have problems with it. I don't think it's a perfect book, but I did really like it, and I'm pretty sure it will be made into a film. In terms of plans about reading books that made the long list but didn't make the shortlist, I have Happy by Nicola Barker, which I really want to read, and then I have 3 Things About Elsie on my Kindle, which I also really want to read. I still haven't read the first Joanna canon, but I may just read both in the near future. So there you go. That was my experience with the Baileys long list and short list. What? Not Baileys. That was my experience with the Women's Prize long list and short list 2018. I hope you enjoyed hearing my thoughts and that you haven't heard them too many times before. I know everyone and their mother on BookTube is making these videos. It is really the only prize thing that I'm getting into. I don't really want to read the Man Booker situation, and I don't really want to do any of that. So no more prize videos for a while from me. Let me know if you'd like to see, if there's anything in particular that you'd like to see coming up soon. I have some ideas, but I'm trying to backlog things a bit because life is getting very busy. So let me know if anything sounds fun, and in the meantime I will see you very soon for my next video. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you're safe and happy and reading well. Bye guys! I don't